the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to part 2 of show 32 of Grey Hat Beards, the modern workplace podcast where we talk about all things Microsoft 365. Last week we did the latest news with Christos, and now we're going to go into talking about security and identity. Just before we do that, I want to do a quick shout out for a show. Look for the 425 show. I think it's aka.ms/425, and that's the numbers show. And lots of streams. I think you said you're on YouTube, TikTok, WeChat, the whole lots, MySpace, all the top latest social media ones. So do go and check out the show. And if you haven't got the link, go and have a look at the show notes.
It's funny listening to you talk about those services as if you really know them.
I was thinking he was.
I've
really
seen my son
about
use them. Yeah, I've seen my son use these things, but. Someone said, are we going to put Grey Hat Beard onto Twitch? And I was like, no. Maybe one day. I'm not going to say never.
When you work out the technology.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not one for kind of bleaching my hair and pretending I'm young again. So I've embraced my old age. But anyway, then whittering like an old man on a balcony. But let's move on slightly. Christoph, I'll really hand over to you to tell us about all the great things on security and identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me again. It's brilliant to be here and talk about the two topics that are dear and near to my heart, security and identity, and trying to keep developers off the news. We're talking about going viral, and there are two reasons that you go viral. One is for the very good news, as in you have a successful business and you're growing your IPO, you're going public, you're making money, and that's brilliant for you and your customers. And then the other one is making the news for the bad reasons, like 533 million Facebook accounts that leaked the other day. For every other company that makes the news every week for messing up with their customers' data. And I know that you guys talk a lot about security and stuff around the Microsoft 365 platform. So security is a tricky subject. Identity is also tricky, especially digital identities. They're everywhere and everyone needs to use them. You can't access anything without some identity. And unfortunately, humans are creatures of habits, and we're lazy and we don't like security in general. And even developers that are into technology don't really take it seriously enough. So
developers are the worst, aren't they? I think
they don't like change. They don't like new challenges. And fun enough, because we write new code and new things all the time. We learn new APIs every single day. So I don't know how these two things can work together, but apparently that's the case. Yeah. So I've screwed up security many times. I remember back in 2007, I got a contract to build a CMS website for a prominent university in Scotland. And, I thought, screw WordPress, screw Braco, screw all these existing systems out there, because I can write a better system, obviously. So I spent 3 months just writing identity components and making sure that they work. And I'm pretty sure I have left many holes in there. And, because you think, well, it's just a username and a password, and I'll store it into some database and it's going to be perfect. I know hashing. I know how to hash things. Then you choose the right hashing algorithm that will store your data securely. And then you think, okay, now I need to do password reset. Oh, I haven't thought about that. So I need to send an email to someone or a text message. What happens if that gets intercepted? What happens if somebody replays that message? How do I check for validity? How do I check that somebody has not stolen your email address and trying to take over your account? And then it's like, oh, two-factor authentication? Yeah, I haven't thought about that. So you start implementing that again, and then you go deep into protocols and standards and, OpenID Connect and OAuth2 back in these early days. It was challenging. There was no documentation around, and I don't think OAuth2 even existed. And I didn't even use any of these things. Like, I rolled my own thing. And that's the biggest mistake you can do as a developer, because we have 1,500 engineers and another 1,000 PMs working very hard 24/7 to make sure that you don't screw up identity in the same way. At least at Microsoft Identity, that's the goal. So they're very clever, much more clever than I am. And the complexities are insane. From where do you store your data to all the way to like advanced features like conditional access. How do you allow certain people to access your app, whereas other are not? And
based on conditions and things like that, it's not just one person does, one person doesn't. It's if they're in this group, and maybe if they're in this group accept something else, there's all
so now you have a workflow engine that you have to build on top of your identity system to do all this kind of matching of patterns and matching of roles and what have you. So it is an insanely complex solution, and not many people realize that.
So like you, Christos, back in the day, writing my own identity, and it's as simple as saying, how do I identify you? How do you authenticate? And starting with those simple questions. And I think Microsoft have made it really easy. You've got, generally the world revolves around email addresses now as a starting point, which is an inherently insecure way to do things. And so building on top of that, I remember trying to identify people and saying, well, is it a combination of their date of birth and their postcode? Oh, wait a second, some countries don't have postcodes. Okay, so I need to think of something else. And what if they're twins? It's just
how many words have they got in their name?
Absolutely, and all of a sudden you're kind of going, okay, it's just hard to identify people, let alone to actually then have them prove that they are actually who they say they are. And that's at that point you're kind of going, okay, so I know how I'm going to identify you. I have my 17,000 digit number that's going to identify you, but how do you prove that you are who you say you are now? And I think this is where there are so many tools out there, from using FIDO tokens to using passwords to using MFA, biometrics. As a consumer, most of us are used to this. And most of us are frustrated by it. We kind of go, oh, I've got to do all of this, and then my phone's going to ring 7 times. If you speak to my wife, she'll go, I'm never using MFA if I can possibly help it, because it just confuses me. But then you guys as developers, I was playing around at the weekend trying to authenticate to Office 365. Now, was I using PowerShell? Was I using a managed identity? Was I using just a password? Just simple text? Did it have to have MFA? There's so many different ways. So we're not just talking here about as a consumer. We're talking about our systems actually interacting and authenticating themselves, and then being granted the appropriate permissions as well to access all the rows in the database, or just a few of them, just a few of those columns. Can they read them? I mean, it's fiendishly complicated to work out all of that authorization process to actually put a mechanism in place, but to actually authenticate is really quite difficult. How do you guys do it from a developer perspective? If I was just starting out, what's the best way for me to authenticate to Office 365?
Okay,
Kevin knows.
Kevin knows.
Go on, Kevin.
You'd get Gary to do it.
No, I mean, I struggled at my last place. One of the key hard parts to it was, and we didn't spin our own, but we were storing properties for a user independently. And we got quite a long way down and realized that was absolutely nuts. The Microsoft Identity platform can store those additional properties, and then they're available in everything. And the biggest problem we had was not, a lot of people sign into a website. They see that as a sign-in process. That's your identity. Now, that website probably talks to at least one other service, if not multiple other services behind the scenes, whether that's Graph, as we were in this case, plus our own APIs, plus it needs to speak to a database, or those APIs need to speak to a database. Then we have Power BI rolled into that as well. So there's all these different services, and you're passing this one identity is going to go back and forth to the other ones. And in some cases, we were kind of re-looking up these properties in multiple different places and go, do you know, maybe we should possibly use the central identity to store this stuff. And then there were some challenges, which I have seen lately have been greatly improved, which is good to see. The good old B2C was a lot of fun when it first came out, and trying to do that in a fairly undocumented way. But I had a look at that a few months back, and that has come on leaps and bounds. Really, really impressive stuff. But I think it's it's all those other things you don't think about. As exactly as you were saying, Christos, it's all the different elements that even if you think about them now, give it 6 months down the line, would have changed. And people who are trying to break into things are thinking up new and innovative ways of causing trouble. And Microsoft will be keeping that up to date. So I hope.
Yeah, we're continuously innovating in the space. Right now, we're very much working hard in ratifying the continuous access evaluation standard, right? And it's not just us, but we're the driving force behind the standard. And this is very important for customers because it means that two things. It improves the access token lifetime, and the access token is what your application will acquire on your behalf to access other resources. So as you say, the web app is where someone comes and signs in, and then this web app has to call something in the backend on the behalf of the user. So it's on behalf of the user, I want to call the SQL database and get some data, or I need to access some storage information, get their OneDrive information, get SharePoint data, call my Cosmos DB, call some other API, right? The problem there is that once you issue the access token, it is alive and valid for the duration of that lifetime of the token. Usually it's a default of 1 hour. That means that if I get my access token and suddenly my boss decides that I shouldn't be around anymore and Microsoft fires me, for that hour, I will still have access to all the resources that were issued to me. And from a security perspective, that's a big no-no. So is there a better way in improving that? Yes, the continuous access evaluation is the effort towards solving that problem, where every time you present your token, there is an evaluation of whether you are still eligible to use that token to access those resources. Right now, we have a proprietary way of implementing that around Graph because the standard has not been ratified. But in the future, think of your app or your API being able to ping some endpoint on Graph or some endpoint in Azure AD to say, is this token valid for this person? Or listening to events where the Azure AD can actually emit and say, this person has left the company, you shouldn't provide them any more access. And that is fantastic. And then you have other things like token binding, where you won't be able to, even if you try to steal somebody else's token, you won't be able to do that because you don't have the secrets. So you bind the token to a specific application secret, and that becomes a binding contract. And it's very hard to replicate or replay those tokens without having access to the application itself or those secrets. Therefore, added security. So we are trying to get ahead of the security issues that we're dealing with every day, but that also requires developers adopting the framework, adopting the platform. Now, the good thing here is that everything I mentioned up until this point, including MFA and conditional access, are things that developers don't have to worry about implementing themselves. So, you add Microsoft Identity into your solution, you get all these things for free. All you have to do is just tell your admin, I need everyone to have multi-factor authentication, and I need everyone to be able to access the application between the hours of 9 and 5. And that's it. You don't have to write code. Now, imagine that, having to write the code to validate where people are coming from and whether they still have access to your app or what time zone they're in or whatever. That's an insane amount of business logic that you don't have to implement or worry about. And that's the important bit.
All those things you're talking about as they get rolled out, it's not having to reconfigure code. That kind of by using the Microsoft Identity and I guess MCell with that, it all appears there for you automatically.
That is correct. Well, it depends on the scenario as well. So we moved from MCell JS, for example, for JavaScript from version 1 to version 2, which moved people away from implicit flow into the authorization code with Pixie. That's PKC, the proof code key exchange, in effect making single page apps a lot more secure because the authorization code does not make it, it's not readable through the URL, which was part of the implicit flow. You had to send the authorization code in the URL. Somebody else could intercept that and use it to acquire a token. Now with authorization code and PKC, proof code for key exchange, it means that your SPAs are a lot more secure when you write JavaScript applications. When you have public clients that cannot be secured, you can rely on that. And that upgrade was seamless. So you dropped a new package, a new library, and it just started working out of the block. For continuous access evaluation, you need to change the code a little bit, considering that you have to listen to events that Azure AD will emit. We haven't really decided how that's going to be implemented, but so you need to be notified. Your application needs to be notified somehow that something has changed in Azure Active Directory. What that format will look like, not sure about that yet, but there might be some additional code that you need to do. However, already Microsoft Addend.web 4.net has an extra property in the configuration that says, I am actually listening, or I'm implementing advanced features like continuous access evaluation for graph, and you can benefit from that. And there's a little bit more code that you need to add. So we are trying to keep our libraries always up to date and provide the latest and greatest.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think we're slightly dumbfounded. I love the sound of that, and I hadn't heard about the latest things on the continual there.
It's an important concept that you're completely offloading all of that authentication. And as you say, you're not taking on the burden of staying up to date, acting against any malicious actors. You're offloading all of that, and you were saying, right, Microsoft is going to handle all of that with the authentication provider. So Azure AD, leave it all there. And that allows all of the identity protection and all of the machine learning around behaviors and everything to kick in. So for all of those potential reasons that, me authenticating might be judged to be illicit or malicious, that will block me before I even get to your application.
Yes.
And in terms of those users, because the question we always get from a client, that sounds amazing, but how much will it cost? Presumably this, if you're using Azure AD, that comes as part of your license there. So there's no additional cost for these things within that. And then Azure B2C, there's some cost, but you get quite a few free included as part of the license, don't you?
So for
remember
B2C,
the latest, like 50,000, wasn't it? Or
it is 50,000 monthly active users. So that is people that sign in at least once per month. That counts as an active user, and that's unlimited sign-ins and sign-outs or interactions with B2C. So, you can have 50,000 people signing in 5,000 times a day, that they're still free there. And then there's a ladder of costs as you increase your usage. But 50,000, if you are a startup or if you're a smaller company, it's a good problem to have. If you have 50,000 monthly active users, then and that's the other thing, like we haven't talked about all the other benefits like scalability. Can my identity scale with my solution? Now, let's say you have your own identity system, like me, young and naive, I wrote my own identity system. So now I need to manage the database. I need to manage the users. What happens if overnight you go viral? That's everyone's dream. How is your database going to scale from, say, 1,000 users to 1 million users? Are you going to be able to handle that? Probably not. And then even if you're able to handle that, let's say it's not a disk or implementation issue. You have backups, you have replication, performance, making sure that the system is always staying, uptime is at the 5 nines or the 4 nines, whatever you want to do, because identity is vital to your system. You can't do anything unless you know who the user is. And that's for one database. Now, I work with numerous customers where they have multiple databases littered all over the system because one development team was working on this system with Angular and Mongo, and they have their own user database. And then these other guys are doing ASP.NET and they have their own database because obviously ASP.NET could not speak to the MongoDB. And suddenly you have like 20 different user databases where you have no idea who the users are or whether they're synced or what kind of permissions they have and then what their roles are. And it's a mess. Like trying to wrangle all these, it's an absolute nightmare. Leaving a lot of security holes in the company. I've been in places where admins still had access after they left the company for 5 years or 2 years because nobody rotated their accounts. They didn't know where their accounts were, and I can still access the production system and do stuff, but I'm not going to do that, right? Then you have the malicious, attacks that happen. Like San Francisco 6 years ago, when one of their network admins went and locked the whole thing, encrypted the network, left. So they couldn't use the system, nobody could change it, and he was the sole, like a single point of failure for everything, configuration, rollouts, backups. It's insane. So we want to eliminate the risk for both developers and organizations, because identity is not just authenticating a user, right? It's accessing data. So how do you securely access your SQL database? And how many of your developers know production system credentials? I'm pretty sure Gary here will say, well, I've worked with production systems. I know passwords, right? It happens.
It's funny. It's we were talking about it's the how. For me, when it comes to identity, certainly I had the beauty of being a SharePoint developer, right? So I didn't have to deal with this. It was already done. I was putting code onto the server. I know that people are just authenticated. That's fine. The system's dealing with that. It then changed with moving into SharePoint Online, because now we're needing to understand off a bit more and Azure and how identity works. And yeah, it's having that understanding of what it's helping you to do, and you're shifting off that responsibility to another platform that is being managed by people who understand the security side a lot more than someone who's just building a widget, right, on an intranet or something. But it's still, right, that little widget needs to access some data that's protected by something, and you have to go through those steps to get an access token, and then call that API to get the data. But it's like you look at it as, am I spending my time wisely developing all this auth stuff just to get some data for a widget? Probably not, right? And that's the way to look at it, is just the more you can shift off a responsibility, actually in a lot of cases you get far more benefits back. You mentioned about credentials. I don't like using the credential. If I can use managed identity, then I'll use that. And then that's
a massive change.
It's a complete step change. That is, we don't even have credentials, and actually we don't need to store credentials either, because we have shifted that off to Microsoft to deal with that problem for us. So like you were saying about credential rotation, there's still organizations that will be doing best practices still, maybe using Key Vault, but then going, are you rotating your keys? Are you keeping them up to date? And again, managed identity is why I absolutely love it, is because it just takes care of that for you. You can just go and use it. And again, the cost element is, well, you just get it, right? It's a service. You're not paying any extra for it, so why wouldn't you? Obviously, there's certain scenarios that it doesn't necessarily go well with, but it's one of those options, and it's one of many options that's available to you as well. If you start looking at, actually, what can I not look after? That's probably a good way to start, right? Just like, I don't want to deal with this. I'll let someone else deal with it, and shift that responsibility somewhere else would be probably a good place to start, I think, with anything identity related in 365.
Managed identities are mind-blowing. If you haven't used them before, then you don't know what you're missing. And once you start using them, you can't live without them. Yep. To the point that people are like, how do I get a managed identity on my on-prem environment? Or how do I get managed identity somewhere else? Because it's inherently an Azure service, right? Yeah. But guess what? We knew that this was so important for our enterprises and our developers that now, via Azure Arc, we made it available everywhere. So we've done demos where we were running code in AWS, and we're still authenticating with managed identities via Azure Arc. So our code did not have any secrets to anything. We just reach out to Key Vault, grab a secret to some database or some storage, and then bring it back securely into the application. You can run it anywhere. You can run on your local machine as well. And the SDKs have made it in such a way that even though on your local machine you don't have a managed identity, you can still use a specific account, whether it's a service principal, a service account in Azure, or your own credentials in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. It will try to find and pick up the right account for you. It will try the CLI, it will try Visual Studio, it will try Visual Studio Code, it will try environment variables. Please don't use them. I'm just saying. It is available, but please don't use environment variables for these things. And then it will try to authenticate on your local machine. Then when you move to Azure, or when you move to an environment that supports managed identities, it will automatically pick them up. So even on your local environment, you never ever have to think about secrets. So me as a developer, I don't have liability anymore about knowing where the developer database is. I either point to Key Vault or I work directly with that database, and that connection string works out of the box. I recently did a demo with Node.js and Cosmos DB that now just added support for mass identities, and it's awesome. And then I did another demo with ASP.NET, and there's a whole blog post about using SQL client with SQL Azure and mass identities to make it work. Now there was a little bit of a customization there because SQL client does not support it out of the box. But I took that demo, went back to the team and said, this is what we need. So now it's been prioritized and earmarked for proper support. So SQL client will automatically pick up the mass identity from your system or an account via the Azure SDK. So it's crazy how we can actually have secretless apps. And then it's secretless deployment as well. How do you secure your DevOps pipeline? Again, you can use service principals and Azure Key Vault. And I have done demos before and blog posts, how to use Pulumi, Terraform, ARM, Bicep, anything, all the tools, just to have a plugin that pulls that information from Key Vault securely, populate your deployment pipeline on the fly. So you don't have to have environment variables. You don't have to have variables in your CI/CD system. All you do is just authenticate, and then it will pull the information accordingly for you. And once you do that, it means companies don't have to worry, developers don't have to worry, end users don't have to worry. It's done. Sold.
So I think one of the issues of people developing in a kind of non-secure way is that they, I'm going to put my hands up. I'm very much a copy and paste developer. I'll go and Google something, find out what I'm trying to do and go, yeah, that looks right. Copy and paste that, make sure I understand how it works, but then carry on with that. So how do people go and find the right place to go and copy and paste this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Documentation is a great place to start, but I think the docs are great if you know what you're looking for. Like if I know that I'm looking for a specific, I don't know, connect my app with SharePoint, like authenticate SharePoint in my .NET code, then docs will probably have a sample, or you'll find something in GitHub. So for us, it's about creating end-to-end scenarios, because the other problem with docs is they're very segregated. They will tell you one thing of the 5 things that you want to make your app work with SharePoint. Like you might say, well, how do I connect SharePoint? It will give you the code for the SharePoint SDK. And then like, okay, so how do I authenticate these things? So you have to do another Google search. Whereas our effort as developer advocacy team is, especially when it comes to identity, to provide content end-to-end, whether that's a video, whether that's a stream, whether that's a blog, or all of the above at the same time. Or even documentation, because recently kicked off an initiative where our docs should move around scenarios rather than individual things, right? One component of the 5. So we're working very closely with our internal teams, the SDKs teams, the platform teams, the docs teams, and ourselves to provide this kind of end-to-end scenario. Hopefully, when you look for something, our blog or our stream will come up first, especially if it's around Azure AD or B2C. And if not, you can find us on Discord and then come and ask for these things, or Twitter or whatever. Feel free to harass us on that. Yeah, we're community driven. That's how I call it. We're customer obsessed.
I think that's, I think we've seen with the Microsoft 365 development, the community driven, the PnP ones just have made such a difference. And the more of Microsoft that's moving that way is fantastic. You kind of think security and identity, that shouldn't be open and things, because that'll just help people find holes. But no, it's not true. You want people to be able to see what's going on. You want to make sure not that people can't find the holes, that those holes aren't there. You want people to find them so you can fill them. That's important stuff.
It's knowing how to use those tools to plug all those holes as well, and to plug them in the best way to make it most efficient to maintain and support and carry on evolving it to keep it safe, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. We always talk about security and compliance from the M365 side, and when we actually start to get into building line of business applications in the cloud, connecting to your data in your M365 tenant, it's very easy to maybe not think that there's active. It just works, right? I just want to get data. But actually, there's so much effort that goes behind that, and so much investment as well from Microsoft. And we're talking about, you know, having the tools in the open. I think the MSAL libraries, they have bug bounties on them as well. So, you know, Microsoft are actively saying, look, find things and we'll reward you as well. So, you know, there's a whole community of people who are out there, you know, testing these libraries as well, who are, you know, just in that world, right? Who are world experts who are looking for these faults so that they can be plugged in, and then, you know, as a developer, I then don't have to worry about that because, oh, there's another version of MSAL, right? Okay, I'm updating, done. There's some holes there that have been plugged that I wouldn't even been aware of because I don't know to that level. But, you know, we can have confidence that we're moving forward and we're keeping secure.
I was going to say, having confidence in the technology that you're using. I remember running a system, and we used to get pen tested every year. And there's nothing worse than you know, having a pen test and have things that you need to remediate, where actually they're so detailed, and you're kind of going, right, I've got to go off and learn for 3 months just to understand exactly how they got to that vulnerability.
What the issue is, let alone how to fix it.
When you don't have to worry about that, and you know that that's all covered. You know, that again is something really important. You know, everything that we're talking about is about securing our identity, securing our data, securing our clients' data. The more we can reassure them, the more that we can reassure everybody involved in the process, the better it is for everybody. You know, it's important that we know that there is that confidence in everything that we're doing and how we're doing it, and all the technology that underpins that.
Yeah, it's a less known fact that Microsoft is the biggest security company in the world, right? We deal with a lot of data. Just alone, Azure AD deals with 30 plus billion authentications a day. Like, that's a day. I had to go back to marketing and double check the B that it was not an M. Like, are you sure it's a B? It's like a B, capital B with billions. And I'm like, yeah, that's 30 plus billions just on Azure AD. Ignore B2C.
That's just our parents trying to log in.
Yeah. That's my mom trying to find her PIN and log in. But
password again. Yeah,
it's insane the amount of data that we get, and also the amount of security. Like, you know, we saw with the SolarWinds issues that happened before, and how quickly Microsoft responding to that. We're not working in isolation. We work as a consortium of companies trying to keep, you know, people secure. And then it's all these other aspects that I don't know about, like, you know, red teams, blue teams, and the fact that, you know, Microsoft is doing a lot of work, so you don't ever have to think about, you know, pen testing your infrastructure on Azure. So if you're running on Azure, there are certain assurances that you know, your infrastructure will be secure. Now, your code needs to also be secure. So there's a certain level of responsibility between Microsoft and Azure, and then you, and where you come. And where we usually see the problems is either a human error somewhere in the chain, hence the reason why we to eliminate passwords or secrets throughout the chain, and then deploying insecure code. And code is a lot harder to secure because it's a lot harder to standardize, right? If you're running a platform, it's going to be consistent for all customers because they're all running on the same platform. If you're creating your own bespoke code that you know, most people do these days, then the challenge is actually there in the bespokeness of that system. So many different ways, and that's why we have so many different challenges with, you know, creating content and making people secure, because there will be some kind of different requirement they have as a developer, and then the docs or the samples don't really make sense to you. So it's a challenge keeping abreast of everyone else.
That's why I love what you were talking about, sort of getting those full end-to-end scenarios and covering those. I think that's so important to people. I know Gregor Suti's been talking a lot about that and saying, let's not just have that single case scenario, because then you end up with these bolted together cases, and that's where the gaps are and things. So I think it's really helpful. Can I ask, I don't want it to be the last question, but an awkward question when it comes to Azure AD and things. Now, there has been some outages in the last few months and things, and it when it comes to Microsoft 365, because Azure AD is such an important part of it, it's so fundamental and cause such a big impact. I mean, are lots of things being done to try and mitigate some of those issues that have caused and things?
Correct. Yeah. It's a constant learning process for us. And I think in the last 6 months, we had like three downtimes with significant impact. There's definitely a retrospective after every single one of these, and there's definitely an action that is taking place to make sure that this never happens again, especially considering that, we just mentioned 30 billion authentications. Imagine if 30 billion authentications couldn't happen in one day. And, the internet just catches fire every time Azure AD goes down because everything stops working. Azure stops working, M365 stops working, your team stops working, you can't do anything. Hence the reason why, for example, continuous access evaluation is becoming such a big thing, because now your access token lifetime can be extended to, say, 24 days, right? Or 24 hours. Therefore, if Azure AD fails, the fact that you have a long-lived token means that you still have access to those systems. And because all those systems work together, they will work in tandem. So if there is a change in the system, it will be propagated down to everybody else. So if I leave Microsoft, then I won't be able to access any system, and everything will be updated accordingly. And therefore, the longer-lived token life cycles means that the systems can be a lot more reliant and don't have to rely on Azure AD validating tokens every 10 seconds or every 10 minutes or every hour. So that becomes, first line of defense in many, many other things that we're working behind the scenes. So, we hear the industry loud and clear, and we need to provide a more balanced approach on uptime and then accessibility and security, right? Because obviously you can't provide a 30-day access token without having the ability to revoke that token and fix the issues, right? So security is paramount, and then ease of use and access is equally important. So we try to balance the two to make sure that customers can continue working throughout the day, while that gives us enough time to recover from any failures, whether are localized or global. And at the same time, you can feel confident that things are secure. So this is where we are, and I get it. It's a challenge, but then again, it's a system, and it's a system run by people. And
I think if we compare it with, running our own, you sort of have days of downtimes and things like that. I think everyone goes, it's Microsoft, everything should be absolutely perfect and things like that. But if you look at the numbers, the actual outage times are relatively small. I think my only request is if you could have them about 4 o'clock. Now the pubs have opened in the UK. That UK time 4 o'clock. If you can do them around then, would be perfect.
Well, every Friday.
I will pass the memo.
Yeah, every Friday
at 4 o'clock.
I'm not fussy. Thursday, Wednesday.
I worked in a bank where we would take the system offline at 10 p.m. on Friday night, because apparently that's when people stop checking their online accounts. I don't know if that's true, but that was the best time. So deployments were always Friday at 10 p.m. I will pass the memo and request along to our identity leadership team, and I'm pretty sure we'll sort something out. 4 p.m. UK.
Perfect. Thank you.
Done.
Yeah, 4
Friday.
p.m. UK.
Yeah, consider it done. Not really. Way above my paycheck. Ideally, no downtime.
So in terms of keeping up with the latest you do, obviously you're on Twitter, and we'll put your Twitter account in there, and the 425 show. Is there any good other places we should follow to keep up with the latest?
There will be a website for us coming out very, very soon. In the meantime, I would say that the documentation and our blogs are probably the best place to learn about the latest and greatest stuff. We do a lot of things on Twitter as well these days. So it's the same problem, right? How do I stay updated with Azure and everything else? So many resources. There will be a website that will be developer focused from that perspective, and then our developer blogs and IT Pro blogs for Azure AD are a very good source of information and news as well.
I'll make sure I keep up with the rest of those. And anything else you wanted to cover at all? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap up. We know it's about this time that Al's stomach starts going and it's dinner time, so we're a little bit over that slightly. But
no, thank you for having me again. I hope developers or our audience picked up some good tips for today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. We have a fantastic team, a support team, both for IT pros and developers, to help you get over your challenges. So if you get stuck, please don't hesitate to reach out, and stay safe, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. The app I worked on my last organisation, I'd love to go back and, having heard all this, go back and change a few things. But if they are listening, sorry, yeah, there's some nasty things that you're going to have to update and improve now. But you've probably already found that out anyway. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week with the latest news and I guess for the week after. Otherwise, I've been Gray.
I've been Hans.
I've been Beard.
Thank you very much, everyone. Speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Grey Hat Beard Podcast. The song Drink Up My Mateys was brought to you by Black Bones under a non-commercial attribution license.